Deep learning for intrusion detection with Dr. C.
Welcome to the Deep Learning for Intrusion Detection series. Today, we will explore the statistical foundations and the essential building blocks used to create smart, reliable AI models for network security. The core idea in machine learning is simple but crucial. We're interested in the entire population. Think of this as the universe of all possible data. But since we can't possibly collect every single data point in that universe, we rely on a training set, which is a smaller representative sample. We use this sample to build a model, which is essentially a mathematical equation that learns the relationships between the inputs, attributes, and the output, target variable. If your sample is large and diverse enough, the model you create will be a very close representation of the entire population, allowing for accurate predictions. So, we have a model, but how does it know what to learn? This leads us to supervised learning. The title slide asks, where do the labels come from? Imagine you're studying for a quiz and you have the answer key. In supervised learning, the algorithm is given the answers, the labels. These labels tell the model exactly what the correct output should be for every input. It's supervised because it's learning under the guidance of these provided answers. Let's make this concrete with a scenario. Look at the table. We have 5 x variables, our features, like blood pressure and temperature. And on the right, we have the y variable, the label, healthy, H, or not healthy, NH. Who provides these labels? It's often human intelligence, a medical expert determining the health status, or a security analyst classifying a network packet as safe or malicious. This human-labeled data is the fuel for supervised learning, teaching the model to find the complex patterns that separate the healthy from the not healthy examples. Time for a quick statistics pit stop. We need to understand how variables interact. Independent events. Think of flipping a coin. The first flip does not affect the second flip. They are completely separate. Covariance. This measures how much 2 variables change together. If the more you study, the higher your grade, that's positive covariance. If they don't change together at all, the covariance is 0, which means they are independent. Correlation. This is just a normalized version of covariance, putting the relationship on a scale from -1 to 1. Makes it easier to compare relationships across different data sets, telling us both the strength and direction of the linear relationship. To summarize data with a single representative number, we use indices of central tendency, mean, the average, sum all observations, and divide. But a warning, the mean is easily pulled away by extreme values, called outliers. Median, the middle value when you sort the data. This is great for when you do have outliers, as it gives a truer midpoint. Mode, the value that appears most frequently. Use this to quickly identify the most common occurrence in your dataset. The relationship between the mean, median, and mode tells us about the shape of our data. In a perfect bell-shaped Gaussian or normal distribution, the mean, median, and mode are all in the exact same spot. It's perfectly symmetrical. If your data is skewed, one of the measures is pulling the others with it. For example, in a right-skewed graph, the mean is pulled out towards the long tail. Bimodal simply means you have 2 distinct peaks, or 2 modes in your data. Understanding these shapes is vital for correctly interpreting your results. This slide tells a famous little joke to prove a huge point. Then there is the man who drowned crossing a stream with an average depth of 6 inches. The average, the mean, was 6 inches, but there must have been a spot that was much, much deeper. A single number is never enough. We must also talk about variability, how spread out the data is. When comparing 2 systems, we almost always prefer the one with the same mean but less variability, because it's more predictable and reliable. How do we measure that variability? Variance, sigma 2. It's the squared distance between each data point and the mean. The problem is that its unit is squared, which makes it hard to compare to the mean itself. Standard deviation, sigma. This is simply the square root of the variance. Because it's back in the original units, you can directly compare it to the mean, which is incredibly useful. Coefficient of variation, COV. This is the ratio of standard deviation to the mean. It's a unitless number that shows you the magnitude of variation, which is perfect for comparing two wildly different systems. Remember the LaGuardia quote: "Statistics are like alienists. They will testify for either side." This reminds us that a sample is just an example. It does not prove a theory. We can never make a definite statement about all systems based on one sample. Instead, we have to make probabilistic statements about a range of systems. We do this by calculating confidence intervals, which tell us we are 95% confident the true performance is somewhere between X and Y. It's about quantifying our level of certainty. Hypothesis testing is the statistical backbone of making decisions. It all starts with the null hypothesis, which is the assumption of no difference or nothing to see here. We then run a test to see how plausible this null hypothesis is. If the test finds insufficient evidence to reject the null hypothesis, we conclude that any observed difference was just by chance, random variation. If the test finds sufficient evidence to reject the null hypothesis, we conclude that the observed difference is real and significant. This is how we prove that one model is truly better than another. This slide kicks off our next section, the steps and components involved in creating a high-quality model. Here we see the CRISP-DM process, which is a widely used industry-standard framework for running a data mining project. It's a cyclical process that guides us from understanding the business problem all the way to deployment. We'll be focusing on the key technical steps involved in the modeling phase of this process. Creating a model is not a single step. It's a systematic process of decision-making, which we will break down into the main parts in the following slides. When you build a model, you're dealing with three core components: the features you feed it, the algorithm you choose, and the hyperparameters you set. Getting the right mix of these three is the secret to a successful machine learning project. Let's focus on hyperparameters. These are the tuning knobs for your algorithm, settings the programmer defaults, but that you, the data scientist, can change. Think of them like the difficulty settings on a video game. They affect the model's behavior, such as how long it runs or how tolerant it is to errors. Choosing the right hyperparameters is crucial for optimal performance. The quality of your model is only as good as the data you feed it. That's why feature selection is so critical. We need to decide which of our data columns are the most important and useful for predicting our target variable. Features are known by many names in the industry: factors, predictors, attributes, dimensions, or X variables. They are simply the inputs we use. A great way to think about them is, what information do I have available that I can use to make the prediction? To define good features, ask yourself two main questions. What influences the problem? What are the variables that logically should affect the outcome? What can we actually collect? Is the data accessible and reliable? A good feature is one that is both logically relevant to the problem and practically available in your dataset. Once you have your features, the next major choice is the algorithm. This is the mathematical recipe the model will use to learn the patterns in your data. Choosing an algorithm is a balancing act, a trade-off between three priorities. You can usually only maximize two. Accuracy. How correct are the model's predictions? Computational efficiency. How fast does the model train and make predictions? Can it run in real time? Interpretability. How easily can a human understand why the model made a certain decision? For example, a simple decision tree is highly interpretable, while a deep neural network is often considered a black box. This is a great historical anecdote. Back in 2009, Netflix ran a famous competition where they offered a $1 million prize to the team that could beat their existing movie recommendation system by a certain percentage. This highlights the real-world impact and intense focus on improving algorithm accuracy and efficiency. If you remember one concept about tuning models, Make it the bias-variance trade-off. It's the constant challenge of finding the sweet spot between a model that's too simple and a model that's too complex. This balance is key to achieving the best possible accuracy on new data. A model's complexity is determined by the number of features, the algorithm chosen, and the hyperparameter values. High complexity can lead to overfitting. The model memorizes the training data. Low complexity can lead to underfitting. The model is too simple to capture the trends. Your job is to find the right level of complexity that allows the model to generalize well. Let's define the terms more clearly using an archery analogy. Bias, this is the error from using an oversimplified model. Underfitting. Imagine an arrow that consistently misses the bullseye in the same spot. It's systematically wrong. Variance, this is the model's sensitivity to small fluctuations in the training data. Overfitting. Imagine an arrow that is all over the target. It's inconsistent and overreacting to minor differences in the training data. The trade-off is that a simpler model, high bias, is stable, low variance, and a complex model, low bias, is often unstable, high variance. You want the model in the middle, low bias and low variance. These slides visually illustrate the trade-off. Underfitting. The line is too simple and misses the core trends. The model fails to capture the complexity of the data. Overfitting. The line is too wiggly and tries to hit every single data point, including the noise. The model has memorized the training data and will perform terribly on new, unseen data. We want a model that fits the general trend without capturing the noise. We've built our model. Now we need to make sure it works. We can't just check its performance on the data we use to train it. That would be like giving students the answers to the final exam beforehand. We need separate, unseen data, which is why we split our data into training, test, and validation sets. Here's the standard split. ... Training set, 80 to 90%. This is the bulk of the data used to build and train the model. The model learns all its parameters from this set. Test set, 10 to 20%. This set is used only once, at the very end, to evaluate the final, fixed model. It is the final, unbiased report card on how well your model will perform in the real world. Watch out for data leakage. This is one of the most critical and sneaky errors. It happens when information from the unseen test set accidentally sneaks into the training process. The result is an overly optimistic performance estimate. Your model looks fantastic on your internal test, but the moment you launch it in the real world, it completely fails. To prevent this, you must split your data before you do any pre-processing or cleaning. If the test set is the final exam, the validation set is the practice quiz. It's used during the training process to compare different versions of your model and fine-tune your hyperparameters. You use the validation set to make sure you're getting the best model before you ever touch the final, sacred test set. This keeps your test set completely unbiased. So, how do we get the most out of our data? We use K-folds cross-validation. Imagine splitting your data into 5 equal folds, or groups. You train the model on 4 folds and validate it on the 5th. Then, you rotate. You do this 5 times, making sure every piece of data gets used for both training and validation exactly once. This technique is incredibly powerful because it maximizes data use and gives you a much more stable and accurate estimate of your model's true ability to generalize. After running K folds, you will have K different error scores, one from each time a fold was used for validation. The final step is simple. We average them together to get the final, most reliable average error. This single number is the most trustworthy measure of your model's real-world performance. The 2 biggest benefits of cross-validation are: it maximizes data use, which is especially important if you have a smaller data set. It offers a far more accurate and robust evaluation of your model's ability to generalize to new, unseen data. The topics we covered today are massive areas of research. If you're interested in diving deeper into why AI can't solve everything, or how unsupervised learning can be a game changer in cybersecurity, these links are excellent resources to continue your learning journey. I highly recommend checking them out. See you next time.